Hello, and welcome to the DC Rock History Podcast. My name is Philip, and today we are talking about the Urban Verbs. Were they rock? Were they new wave? Were they punk? Were they something in between, a mix of all three? That is a big part of what we discussed today. They were certainly an awesome band that started at the end of the 70s and went into the 80s. And was there for the advent of the Atlantis Club and the 930 Club. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm joined today by Andrew Grossman, who is the founder and lead singer of the North Country, as well as Astronomy Club and Andrew Grossman and Friends. Speaking of, he is one of my oldest DC music friends. So we've both been playing in bands next to each other or alongside one another for the last 10 years. So we had a lot to talk about in regards to the scene now versus the scene back then, and what genre means, and of course, diving into the music itself. So lots of really cool stuff to talk about today. Let's get into it. Without further ado, here's your hardcore history section. This episode is brought to you by New Columbia Record Club, the official membership club of Birdland Records. As a member, you'll get to pick a curated vinyl every month from categories like DC local music, vinyl classics, and the best new records out there. Members also get early access to limited titles, exclusive invites to listening parties, and surprise giveaways and swag throughout the year. It's a vinyl club built by DC music lovers for DC music lovers. Sign up now and get 10% off when you use the promo code DCROCKS at checkout. We've got that link in our show notes, so just go ahead and click right on it. I've been a member for years and I love it, so hey, join the club. Sign up today and get started with your record of the month.
Flex your head. It's time for some hardcore history.
Urban Verbs were a high-energy new wave band that played a pivotal role in DC's transformation at the end of the 70s. Formed in 1977 by vocalist Roddy Frantz and guitarist Robert Goldstein, the band emerged with a clear sense of ambition and aesthetics. While Frantz's vocal delivery and the band's angular rhythms inevitably drew comparisons to Talking Heads, Roddy's brother Chris played drums in that band, Urban Verbs weren't imitators. They had a sound rooted in DC's creative class, moody, stylish, and laced with the tension of a city on the edge of something new. They found their footing at the Atlantis, a club that they helped bring to life. Goldstein rented office space in the Atlantic building for his design work and struck a deal to use the building's restaurant as a rehearsal space and performance venue. On January 27, 1978, the Urban Verbs headlined the first ever show there, a bill that included the Slicky Boys and White Boy. Over the next year, the Atlantis became the city's go-to venue for punk and new wave, until a boycott fractured the scene. After the club's owner began clashing with younger fans and refusing to pay bands, much of the community pulled out. Urban Verbs didn't. Their decision to keep playing there drew a line between themselves and DC's more grassroots punk bands, making the start of a split between the city's art rock and hardcore camps. In 1980, the Urban Verbs released their self-titled debut on Warner Brothers. The album was sleek and sharp, full of carefully crafted tension but lacking a breakout hit. A dismissive Rolling Stone review undercut the band's momentum, and their second album, Early Damage, followed with little fanfare. Still, their impact on DC's music scene was lasting. They helped seed both the 930 Club and Inner Ear Studios, two institutions that would define the next era of DC rock. Urban Verbs didn't sound like most of their local peers, but they helped build the infrastructure that would carry the scene forward. Hello, and welcome to the DC Rock History Pod. My name is Philip, or Fizz, and we are exploring the 80s in DC rock and roll, specifically new wave. At the moment, I'm flying solo. I'm flying without a co-pilot. Alex couldn't be here today, but luckily, I have an old friend on the pod, the leader, the establisher, the founding member of the excellent DC band, the North Country, Andrew Grossman. Welcome to the DC Rock History Pod. How are you feeling today?
I am feeling good. Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
It is my pleasure. This is our first morning pod, so we'll see if the energy comes through differently.
Oh, yeah. This is a new experience for me. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
me
not
too.
normally talking to anybody at this early in the morning, let alone being on a podcast.
Yes, I only talk to a baby this early, and they don't really care what I say. I don't have to be very coherent, so I'm gonna have to try and form real sentences this time. But I have a question for you for our
Yes.
icebreaker, and it's a two-parter.
Okay.
What is your relationship to genre? And what was your let's start here. What was your relationship to musical genres growing up? And what is your relationship to musical genres now? For example, was it strictly enforced among your friend group when you were growing up? Or was it always loose? Were you a punk? Were you an indie kid? Were you a, whatever? However that sits with you.
Yeah.
Where's your, where did you start and where are you
Yeah.
now?
I think I have always bristled at it. I've always had an antagonistic relationship with genre. I think maybe and when I first started listening to music seriously, like in middle school and high school, I think I had tastes that were pretty varied, and I bristled against any sort of restrictions on that. There was a little bit of a taboo against pop music um,
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger, which I am happy to say I've I've processed that, and that no longer exists within me. I think genre is something that may be useful after the fact, after something's been made and it needs to be like classified for marketing purposes, but the
Mm-hmm.
actual like oh no I'm talking through it and thinking about it. I take it back. I think there are interesting ways that an artist can play with genre. Like there are certain expectations
Mm,
around music in a certain genre that can be incorporated into an artistic statement that could be cool. Um, but as so okay, so then I guess I am for genre. But okay, as like a tool, as like a that can be incorporated into the art as like a way of playing with it, playing with expectations, playing with tradition, then it can be cool. When it's used as a cudgel to be like, oh, this
mm,
isn't that, or therefore it doesn't qualify for whatever, that I think is dumb. How's that? Doesn't it work?
yeah. No, it's great. I mean, I think it's part of the eternal question too, and obviously, well, not obviously, but today's band is thought of as a new wave band,
Right.
and at the time, that was so important. And I've even got a flyer up from the University of Maryland homepage that says like New Wave Night at the
Yeah.
Atlantis. So I think maybe in a different era, the genre thing had so much weight. But then I was thinking about it in terms of like the long history of things. So at one time it's so important,
Right.
right? And then at another time, like I was wondering to myself, at what point is the cutoff? Is it 20 years, 30 years where you just become rock or classic
Right.
rock or whatever? Because certainly we're hearing Led Zeppelin and Talking Heads on the same, clear
Sure.
channel FM
Sure.
stations these days. And those lines that would have been so like sharply drawn at one point have become blurred and become they almost seem like silly, but you know, they were so important. I still think of like maybe emo bands today. Sometimes I'll hear a band and I'm like, I like this a lot, and then somebody will inform me, that's an emo band. Usually it's one of my bandmates, and I'm like, oh, because they know I don't like generally gravitate towards that music.
Yeah.
But it's like certain bands use that as a boost or a super highway to like reach new
Right.
audiences. Like I think of Oso. Like they don't really strike me as an emo band, but they strike me as a rock band. But in the early stages of your career, I think that's like a
Sure.
helpful genre can be a helpful like just way to streamline yourself to an
How do
audience.
you
So
feel about genre?
I was strict about it when I was
Mhm.
growing up, and so now I think of it in a more personal sense of like, oh, how foolish I was. But I was like, only rock. Rock
Right.
is cool. Everything else sucks, and I was really annoying. I may have,
Yeah, sure.
yeah. So and then I went through a long period where I didn't listen to any guitar music. Ironically, when I was starting my own band, I didn't listen to anything with guitars at all. I just listened to hip hop and pop, and then now I've sort of settled back into my rockist ways. But we were getting music from bookstores on CD when I was growing up, and we were also getting it. And then shortly thereafter, we were trading thumb drives back and forth of what we had downloaded, and I would just tell people like, I only want the rock, or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
The rock section at the Olsons in Old Town. But another reason that I brought this up, and I'd love to shift into a little bit of personal history, a little bit
Sure.
of more modern DC rock history, talk about your band, the North Country. I also had this on the brain because I don't know if you consider yourselves new wave. I don't know if you think about genre for your own band at
Yeah.
all, but if there's a family tree that is started by the Urban
Yes.
Verbs, you're one of a handful of bands that are still going that are in that lineage. I think of Stronger Sex,
Oh,
who I
yeah.
don't think is around
No.
anymore, but I was like, oh yeah, they probably fall in there. Maybe Young
Yeah.
Rapids
Brenda, for sure.
at times, but the theatrics of what was happening in that, some people call it punk, some people call it new wave. They're kind of interchangeable, but like it's CBGB and then down in DC, you have honestly gone more that direction over time. At least to my mind, your band started with "You Can Never Go Home Again" in 2012, and has released just a long line of great records and EPs, leading up to. Then This Was Not a Plant. I realized that for those watching on the video, I've got "The Future Is All We Need." Terrific album from
Thank you.
2024, and then "The New You" is the latest release that you all put out in 2025. So. Anyways, do you think about genre? Do you think about the North Country genre at all, or do you just think of yourselves as what the big bucket of alternative rock?
Yeah, I think we draw from a lot of different artists across
Mhm.
a lot of different genres. And I think that when we draw from them, we are aware of the
Mm.
genre context that they're coming from. So maybe to some extent, but it's less like boundaries that we need to fit into. Like we'll set other kinds of boundaries that we'll need to fit into, but it's rarely like the boundaries
Yeah.
of a specific genre that we put
Mhm.
ourselves in. That certainly makes it harder to market after the fact. So we definitely have our work cut out for us in that respect. But no, I don't.
Yeah.
To answer your question, a little bit we think about it, but maybe not so much.
This conversation today is super intertwined with Talking Heads because Roddy Frantz of Urban Verbs is brothers with Chris Frantz of the
Yeah.
Talking Heads. The sound is very linked. I had the opportunity to see Remain in Light. My friend Nate does sound for Jerry Harrison's band, which plays a lot of Talking Heads
Right.
music. It's not. I think there's a little bit of other stuff that they play, but and Jerry sings a lot. But then there are certain places where, once in a lifetime, for example, there's sort of just an obligation for someone to be doing the David Byrne
Yeah.
part. What I'm getting at it with all this is when I went to see them at the Lincoln Theater, there was a guy who was really doing a great job. He was selling it. But, the bottom line is he's not David Byrne. He was our age. He was younger. My strong guess is that he has a musical theater background. He was
Okay.
really... It was like he was the next guy that had gotten the part in a Broadway musical after the
Just
originator,
imagining
right?
that right now.
Yeah. But I thought of you because I thought it was great. It was really well done and it was a lot of fun. But seeing a North Country show feels a lot more like, oh, this is probably what it felt like to see Talking Heads at CBGB, because like you're not trying to do David Byrne, but there is like there's certainly not like a ton of people out there doing
Right.
like the sort of, it's almost like the sort of Southern Baptist preacher
Sure.
thing that you can kind of embody at times, and now that you have like a full band with great singers sort of backing you up in the same way Talking Heads did, it really feels like very like alive in that
Yeah.
way. So I guess my only point is this is just an endorsement for anyone out there listening. Go check out the North Country when they're on tour, because it's a super fun show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you think about that at all? Like the Talking
Yes,
Heads of it?
absolutely. I mean, they're definitely an influence for us in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. It's interesting to like be talking about genre, because when I was listening to the record, the Urban Verbs record that you sent,
Mhm.
like I think we had like similar tracks. Like, it's interesting that you bring up genre, like, but I was thinking about it more in terms of like aesthetic. And I think
Mm.
in regards to our band, the parameters around that we set up for ourselves are maybe less around a genre and more around an aesthetic.
Oh, that's
And
great.
and
That's really fascinating.
and so like each song might have a different aesthetic, and like the aesthetic might be drawing from different genres. Maybe just introducing that idea of aesthetic into the conversation going forward, because that was definitely a
Mhm.
thing that I was thinking about, which we can talk about with the Urban Verbs record.
No, that's really fascinating. Also, something I noticed when speaking of aesthetic, when I was looking at your whole discography here, is really as far back as 2012, but like certainly starting in 2017, you have this cutout design that you've sort of favored, and it was really ahead of the curve. I feel like that's really become quite ubiquitous these days. But you were sort of like there before the
You're
rest of us.
talking about the album art.
The album art
Yeah,
specifically, yeah, just speaking of aesthetic, it was something that I had noticed when everything was kinda back to back. There's probably a better, it's sort of collage
it's
art, but I don't know if there's a better way
it's
to, yeah.
that is all my friend Abi Kalushi, who
Hmm.
is a really fantastic artist, and her Instagram is unapologetic banana.
Well, she's
That's
done a
really,
great job, yeah.
it's all her.
Well, it's very cool, it's very unifying too, looking at it all,
With the exception of
side by
There
side.
Is Nothing to Fear. I think all of them. Actually, There's Nothing to Fear and Exquisite Corpse. It's all Abi.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's great. It's very cool. It is a place where transitioning over to the Urban Verbs, I feel like they are, I mean, I have less to say about their like album art, but just the general aesthetic and vibe. I think, when they borrow, it may be, it's okay, like it works. But then when they start to be more, I think the more they tried to be the Talking Heads, the less it works for me. The more they try to be, the more that they're their own thing, the more I'm like, oh, I feel a real band poking through
Yeah.
here. Yeah, and we can get into it.
Do you think they were?
The band.
Do you think
Yeah,
they
go
were
ahead.
trying to be the Talking Heads, or was that just like that was just in the air, and
Yeah,
the Talking Heads happened to do it better?
I really, it's
That
so
was because
hard.
that was my impression. Was like they were like going back to aesthetic here. Like there
Yeah.
was this sound, this like that
Right.
was just kind of floating around, and for whatever reason, the way the Talking Heads did it just clicked with people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing like bad about the record.
No. Yeah.
Like I don't like I thought it was like, which is so crazy to me that this is like 5% different from Talking Heads or whatever,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
like the effect is 500% different,
Yep.
which is so weird that
Yep.
like that's like the difference between like great and okay is like so minuscule sometimes.
Yeah. It is, and even the component parts are, I mean, it's good singing, there's
Right.
good guitar
Yeah.
playing, it's solid rhythm section, like, there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong, and I I was, this is a different genre entirely, but I was just in an Uber, and they were playing the SiriusXM coffee channel, or I don't even know, maybe it was alt country, and it kept being like Jelly Roll and Zach Bryan and whatever, and I was like, I'd never heard anyone sing like this before 5 years ago, and now I can't get away from this sort of scream country. And no comment on that genre. It's just like, it is a funny thing where like no one has ever done this, and then suddenly 15 people are doing it, 100 people are doing it, and probably David Byrne was first. I mean, Talking Heads 77 definitely predates this band, but even Devo, like, that's 78, and the Urban Verbs don't get an album out until 1980, which we're talking about today. But to get a little bit into that origins on the history side, Robert Goldstein of the Urban Verbs rents a space in the Atlantic building for his artwork, and then he strikes a deal to use the unused restaurant space as a new wave punk club. Specifically, January 27th, 1978, some big DC history. The first show at the Atlantis with Urban Verbs, Slicky Boys, and the unfortunately named White Boy. And
Are you is the name the unfortunately named White Boy, or is it White Boy?
No, it is just White Boys or White Boy, and someone will come after me because I know White Boy was an important band in the DC area, but it's not my favorite name of all the groups that have come out of here. But yeah, really, like by 1978, the group really, or the club really starts becoming the primary venue for DC's punk and new wave scene. The Cramps, Dead Boys, and The Look play there. So The Look is someone's old band, and I will drop that in when I figure it out. But
Roddy Frantz.
I think it might be
dude, it's Roddy Frantz.
Roddy Frantz. Roddy Frantz's old band. But it might, anyways, it's one of the members' old band. And then after a major chaotic incident at the Cramps show, there was a big boycott from the DC punk community of the Atlantis, and this plays like kind of a big role because it's described at length in Dance of Days, the Mark Anderson and Mark Jenkins book on punk in DC. And it was sort of a dividing line, and I think the Urban Verbs and maybe Still White Boy or and then Tiny Desk Unit continue to play there, whereas like other hardcore bands and younger bands specifically boycotted the band. Okay, so Slicky Boys and White Boy supported the boycott. Urban Verbs did not, and it's kind of important because early DC punk and DC hardcore was so much about dividing lines and like internal scene politics. I mean, diving into the music, I think, like I've listened to Minor Threat and SOA and stuff for years, but diving into it and then learning more about the history, you realize, oh, this is really like all about each other. When you really focus on the lyrics, there's a lot of mudslinging and just like young people expressing themselves, and this was one of those things that became like a real big deal. The Urban Verbs are kind of like critical darlings. They go up to CBGB and get a lot of buzz. They secure a deal with Warner, which, like, no surprise that through kind of a relationship to the Talking Heads, they probably had the right people at that show. But still, I mean, it's, they're clearly a really strong band. Okay, yeah. So Sire Records put out the Talking Heads, which is a record label owned by Warner Music Group and distributed by Warner Records. So that's a helpful little thing there. But they're still, staying in DC. Unlike Bad Brains, they don't move up to New York and kind of cash in on what would probably be an easy lift from the scene up there. But let's get into a little lineup, which is Robert Goldstein on guitar, Robin Rose on keys, Linda Frantz on bass, and Danny Frankel on the drums. Oh, I have omitted Roddy Frantz on vocals. And he, again, is, of course, related to Chris Frantz of the Talking
Drummer
Heads,
from the Talking Heads,
but not spelled the same way as Linda Frantz, which is France.
Oh, interesting.
What do you think? What's your
of the record?
how does how does all the scene politics sit with you? As a person who's been involved with scene politics, we're always trying to draw it back to the modern day.
I have so little interest in scene politics. It's like, so I'm like, it's familiar. And when I think like North Country now, we've kind of navigated to a point where we like have a good community and there's not a lot of drama. And when I was in the midst of scene politics, I would just like back up and like, this is, you guys do this, I'm going to be over here playing guitar, So I understand it. I know, I think if I were like 15 and hearing about it, I would have like thought, oh, wow, that's so cool. This is what bands do. And being older now and having lived through stuff like that, I think it's stupid. I am not impressed by it. But I understand.
Yeah,
I understand it.
It's deeply important at the time, and then as you get older or get outside of it, it becomes just like something that's not where the energy is going to go.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But it makes a lot of sense, and because there's two reasons that a little dispute like this is, I don't know if it's important, but certainly something that comes up a lot, has been written about a lot. It's because it's like crucial to the formation of a new subgenre. Like the way DC hardcore sort of emerges from this is really important. The way straight edge emerges from this is very direct.
That makes sense.
And then that goes hand in hand with, the Atlantis becomes the 930 Club, which is really one of like America's great venues.
Right.
And though it's changed locations, the Atlantis, which was just like a restaurant / venue space / I guess art exhibition space, becomes the 930 Club in 1980. And so between that and then, Ian Mackay basically convincing Dodi DeSanto, the founder of 930 Club, to put X's on their hands, which basically creates the straight edge aesthetic and vibe for Teen Idols, and it's the cover of that Teen Idols release, and then becomes like integral to the whole scene. This little dispute about basically like punk bands being too rowdy in a restaurant. I think they served Greek food is the word too. It's like completely reasonable that someone would be like, please do not destroy my restaurant with your rock and roll. But
over a table,
it was a dividing line thing for these bands and then the DC scene overall. But I think without further ado, we'll jump into our listening section.
Let's
what do
do
you
it.
say? I love it. All right. We're going to start at the top. We're going to start with the first song on the record, which also happens to be the second time that this specific infraction has occurred, which is a DC band writing a song about the subway. And I have to look it up. I'm sorry to be my own fact checker. When did people start calling it the DC Metro?
Right.
Because, let's see, 1976, to my knowledge, it was called the Metro. I don't know.
Yeah, what was he referring to?
Who knows?
Was he referring to the New York subway?
What is he referring to? First the Cherry people, and now Urban Verbs are committing this heinous infraction of talking about our rail system as the subway. But even though I put it down, it's a fun song. Let's check it out. All right, that's Subways by the Urban Verbs. Andrew, coming in on your thoughts. What do you think?
Well, the first thing I noticed was that delightful early 80s snare tone.
Yeah.
Which I was like, oh, okay, it's one of these records, which I like. I liked like the vocal style and the lyric style feels very Talking Heads of like the inflection, but also the content of like, let's write about the subway. And that's it.
Yeah.
There's no like deeper social message, but like this is a fun component of modern life. Let's speak of it. And no analysis about it or deeper thought. But in a charming way that I liked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it just kind of like a commenting on something in his life that felt maybe significant, maybe completely insignificant, but I liked it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. There's great component parts. The band is great. The guitar especially sounds really good right from the jump. I mean, I'll be honest, I think starting off the album with this sort of most Talking Heads knockoff that they have in their catalog, I have this has been on my list of albums to talk about for a long time, and I have come back to this record, and I just start with The Angry Young Man. I just like to kind of jump in at track 2 personally.
Oh, interesting.
And I've been a little I feel like I've been a little harsh on Urban Verbs thus far, but I really do love them. I think they're a great band, and I think they're a really like cool branch of DC rock that in my head I don't think of as existing. The producer Mike Thorne, who also did Wire, this is like puts it in a pretty cool punk or post-punk or new wave lineage that I like to hear, or that I listen to regularly. And I mean, I'm a big fan, but this track 1 is not my favorite. I think to kind of segue into the next one, I think when The Angry Young Men just strikes me as like a little bit more, it's like it's really not something that Devo or Talking Heads would write. It's a little bit more like personal and feels a little bit more like true to themselves, and honestly feels a lot more of the DC rock scene. Like the 80s are certainly characterized by a whole lot of angry young men in DC. So I know that like this is something in the air, and I mean I think this one's where it starts to shine through as like, oh, cool. I feel a perspective here that that is unique and like, and rings true to me. Not that Subways isn't, but let's give that a listen.
Did you say that you thought this one sounded less like Talking Heads than the first?
I should say the lyrics
Oh, okay.
sound less like
All right.
Talking Heads. Because even if he's writing in a character, the fact that he's writing like "we are immortal, we are blah blah," it just feels like a little bit more like it does feel very like DC punk, or not exactly, but what I mean is like the sort of like I don't know, bravado or I don't know, swagger is maybe not the right word, but it's kind of a fun. It's less like a observation on like what you were saying, like modern life, and more of sort of like I feel him coming through, even if it's meant to be like some character study of the angry young man. It's like, well, he's convincingly selling me on that idea as a vocalist.
Yeah.
So, even if he's trying to comment on the angry young man, that doing a pretty good job of being one himself, or like at least bringing that like emotion through. But no, like the
structure,
sonically,
the
yeah,
guitar part,
yeah,
all of it, which is so in it. I think it's interesting that like why is it that this like totally good song, didn't work on like a massive level, but like Talking Heads did. Like, what was it in us, the listener, that rejected this and accepted Talking Heads? It's kind of an interesting thing that with I think about this with some of those like the kind of genre defining bands, or like like when like the Beatles first came out and everyone like lost their mind. It's almost like there was like a Beatles shaped little like box in people's mind that they didn't know they had, and then the Beatles came and fit like right into the box, and they lost their mind. Like 14-year-olds across the country after seeing Ed Sullivan like lost their mind because it just like the like receptor existed in their mind before it came. And I think there was like a Talking Heads receptor that existed in people's minds in the early 80s, that when Talking Heads came, it just fit right in. And like Urban Verbs kind of fit in, but it didn't really. But I don't, it's like an interesting thing, because like I don't know how that box got there. I don't know why it's shaped the way it is, but like when I was like 11 and I heard like Intergalactic by the Beastie Boys for the first time, like the sound of like Intergalactic was like the coolest thing I'd ever heard. It was like there was an intergalactic shaped box in my head, and it just fit right in. And I don't know why I had that, but I did. And I still like the Beastie Boys. So
no, I completely know what you mean. The first season of this show was basically a list of variations on the Beatles, and I don't mean that with any disrespect or anything. I think there were just 5 in every town. I think there were 5 Beatles copies in every town, and the distinct difference was there was kind of a gold rush, and so if you started a band within a year or two, you could be like signed. And the sort of kiss of death of that was that we all know the Malcolm Gladwell thing with 10,000 hours, but like the Beatles had been the Beatles for years and like really grinding and really working hard, because there was no Beatles. There was just, you could just be a band that played team clubs. And then when that became sort of marketable, and I think this leads into what we're seeing here too, is like, just looked it up, like Cream magazine starts in 1969. So like that's like 7 years later, the Talking Heads are going to start to kind of like fill a marketing gap in the Cream magazine advertising space and publication space of like counterculture. And not to reduce it to that, because like I think there's great music here. I also think David Byrne specifically is pretty undeniable as like a fixture, and I think he's not someone who like cultivated an image so much as like really is sort of a unique individual. I mean, he cultivated an image, but it's not like he was doing a bit, you know. I don't think he's doing a that's even that. It's so nuanced, yeah. But
I mean, that giant suit, like that's a bit.
right. I guess I mean more like Matty Healy of 1975 seems to be he's all a bit. Yeah, exactly. And you're like, it's a whole shtick almost. It's not. That's a good point. He's doing bits. He's not doing shtick. But the other thing that I would say is there's no psycho killer on this album, which perhaps what's the chicken and what's the egg?
Yeah.
You know, did it need a single that popped, or do we know Psycho Killer because it was an album that popped? And you know, right? Like, I'm not sure, but I am inclined to think that maybe Psycho Killer being something that you could play for a 10-year-old or you could play for your grandma, and both people are kind of like, I know this song, I like this song. It sort of fit into our cultural slipstream of like, this is acceptable to play at football games and also acceptable to play at weirdo parties. You know? Like, there's not quite one of those on this record.
That's
though, yeah. But I wanted to, and that leads to the next one I wanted to check out, which is the Only One of You. But I see the Only On of You. What is this? What's this? Let's get to the bottom of this. The Only One of You. My goodness. Well, let me put out the bat signal to the folks at Warner Records. On Apple Music, you've misspelled this track.
Oh, no.
The Only On of You. Wow. Well, that's why there's no hit. People are out there trying to find this song and they can't find it because The Only On of You. But let's listen to that. And then, Andrew, if you have one that you want to go out on, we'll listen to one more after that.
I was paralyzed, I couldn't write, I didn't care if it was day or night, but then there's you, the only one of you, oh, beautiful you. Now I believe in you. Your boyish hair, a naked face, we collided, I'm in outer space, and I love you, the only one of you, incredible you. And what's this boy to do? The scent of you is not clinical, the shape of you not institutional. I touch your lips, I see your eyes, time and time again I realize there's only one.
All right. This to me is the high point of the album. I love this song.
Do you think that they were, because okay, so you brought up like the Beatles, and then the Beatles were successful, and then there were all these other bands that were just copying the Beatles, and I think like the same thing happened with like Nirvana, and then the same thing happened after like Angel Olsen and Phoebe Bridgers, and now there's do you think that these are just that Urban Verbs was copying Talking Heads, or was it just like they were all listening to the same thing, living similar lives, and coming to similar musical conclusions?
Looking at where they are in the timeline, I think they were copying, and because of the literal fraternal relationship, I think they started by copying, but when they get to a song like this, they really are doing something unique, and I think it's a marketing issue if that maybe had been track one, okay. So what I was gonna say is, I think like that reminds me of Duran Duran. They don't have their first release until 1981, so they've beaten them by a year. And then by, they started several years before then. Duran Duran does the new wave for the radio, basically. They find a way to be like palatable to the masses, very well. And I think maybe Urban Verbs were trying to be that CBGB lane where they needed to be this thing that was just one lane over, which is that like love song version, that Angry Young Men, when it's talking about real emotions, that goes to a deeper place to me than Subways, which I think just, is track one, maybe to just be like, let's signal to people that we're part of this CBGB new wave thing, but we're doing it in DC. Well, we've got our own place in DC. It's called the Atlantis. That's my take on it.
My read, I think I mentioned this earlier, was like that they were just kind of on the same wavelength, but hearing you talk about the timeline, maybe there was more influence. The influence was like a one-way street rather than they're on the same wavelength.
Hard to say, but it's definitely a cool band to revisit. I really appreciate you coming on to
are we done? Is this it?
Jam on Urban Verbs? That's it. This is it. It goes quick. Digging into the history.
Great.
And speaking of, do you have anything that you want to plug? This will come out in early April.
Okay. Well, we have North Country has a show booked at Pearl Street on May 30th, Friday, May 30th, with Dorinda and Nighthawk. So that's what at the time we're recording this, it is not yet announced, but when it comes out, that will be announced. So there it is. Yeah.
I love that. I've come across Nighthawk because there was a great and is a great DC band from the 70s called The Nighthawks. And I found Nighthawk on Instagram looking for The Nighthawks and was pleased to see that name is still out there in the air. People are still getting mileage out of Nocturnal Birds.
And we got our name from the 70s band, The North Countries. That's not true.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Which track would you like to go on?
I don't know that I have a specific one. So I liked Bela Lugosi, or what? No, what was it? Luca Brasi.
Luca Brasi from the I want to say The Sopranos, not The Sopranos, from The Godfather. Right. All right, Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes, and as do we. Good night, everybody.
so damn cold tonight. It's cold tonight. I feel crazy. I get upset when you're not with me. I pick you up from your silly party. Yes, you ditched your date when he wasn't looking. Yeah, you ditched that jerk when he wasn't looking. We take a drive. You say let's go for a drive. We take a drive. We drive down to the seashore.